Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first Security Bank Economic Forum for 2021. I'm Mimi Young, ABS-CBN News Channel business correspondent and your host and moderator for today. Now, it's been over a year since the COVID-19 pandemic crippled entire industries, forced many companies to close, and left millions without paychecks. Today, businesses have a better understanding of the challenges that they face and how to overcome them. Businesses have also taken action, whether that's to extend their runway or to pivot altogether. We're also a little bit more hopeful now and beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel with a vaccination rollout. We're a step closer to recovery and regaining a sense of normalcy. Our speakers today will be speaking with us and to share their insights on the future of the manufacturing industry. Will it rise to meet the moment? Before we start with the presentations, I'd like to call on the President and CEO of Security Bank, Mr. Sanjeev Vora.
Good morning, everyone. It is my honor to welcome you to Security Bank's 2021 Economic Forum. First and foremost, I would like to acknowledge the distinguished speakers joining us today. Honorable Ramon Lopez, Secretary of the Department of Trade and Industry, Mr. Gregory Banzon, EVP and COO of Century Pacific Food, Inc., and Mr. Tomohiro Ando, Investment and EPA Advisor of the Japan External Trade Organization, Manila. To our clients, business partners, and friends from the media, thank you for taking time off to be part of our online economic forum and making today's virtual event more meaningful. Some of you may remember that in August last year, we held our first virtual economic forum. The keynote speaker then was Department of Finance Secretary Carlos Dominguez, who discussed the impact of COVID-19 on the economy and the financial sector. That same event eventually won an award of excellence at the recent Philippine Quill Awards, a prestigious awards program for business communications. Congratulations to the team. November of the same year, the second leg of Economic Forum focused on how COVID-19 affected the healthcare industry. This event was headlined by Marikina Representative Stella Kimbo, Ms. Leong Suk May, Head of Global Market Research for the Global Markets Division for Asia at MUFG Bank Limited, and Security Bank's very own EVP and Treasurer, Raul Martin Pedro. Months later, after the last economic forum, we still face the same pandemic, but we are now in a very different place than we were 1 year ago. With the availability of vaccines, economic and social recovery are on the horizon. Industries and customers have also adapted and found ways to thrive. As a bank, we service a wide range of businesses across multiple industrial sectors. Definitely, the manufacturing industry is one sector that we cannot overlook, as it is very much part of the lifeblood of many other industries. Hence, for this leg, we have decided to deep dive on the Philippine manufacturing industry. We've invited experts from the government and the private sector who can provide valuable information on the future of the Philippine manufacturing industry. Hopefully, today's information session will help equip industry leaders like yourself with actionable insights to realign your business strategies in response to the pandemic. Now more than ever, it is important to look into and prepare for the future. And this starts with a vision. Customer behaviors, market trends constantly shift, and industries continue to be reshaped. Along with these, Security Bank is determined to adapt and find paths to grow. As we look ahead, allow me to share how we envision our way forward together with you. Keeping our focus on you, our customers, has always been integral to our success. Today's environment, however, requires us to go on even deeper. As we position ourselves into the future, we commit to become the most customer-centric bank in the Philippines. In this regard, we have made and continue to make significant investments in the areas of technology, risk management, and workforce upskilling that will help us serve you better. As we realize this vision, please also continue to look forward to client-focused initiatives that support your success. We will continue to stage exclusive events like today's Economic Forum that provide an avenue for us to share expert advice and knowledge that help you make financial decisions. Simply put, we are committed to investing in our customers. This means investing in what matters to you. We are here to help you thrive, understanding your needs, and building our long-term relationships. And our customers can expect an even better customer experience. Our new vision will drive us to keep getting better and continue our track record of excellence. Allow me to end my message with great news. Security Bank was recently awarded by the Asian Banker as the strongest bank in the Philippines for the year 2020. We couldn't have achieved this milestone without you. Our customers have always been the inspiration for our efforts and accomplishments. Thank you very much for your continued trust. On behalf of Security Bank, again, welcome to our Economic Forum. Maraming salamat.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vora, for that very warm welcome and for introducing us to Security Bank's new customer-centric vision. Truly an exciting road ahead for Security Bank and its clients. Let me now introduce today's keynote speaker. He has a solid background on macroeconomic and industry development, having worked for both the public and private sector. In addition to leading the Department of Trade and Industry, he chairs several institutions such as the Board of Investments and the Small Business Corporation. He also oversees attached agencies such as the Intellectual Property Office of the Philippines and the Cooperative Development Authority. One of his most notable awards includes the Honorary Agora in Nation Building Award in 2018. That same year, he received from the President the Order of Sikatuna with the rank of Datu, one of the highest honors one can receive in the Philippines. He earned his bachelor's degree in economics from the University of the Philippines and topped his master's degree in development economics at Williams College, Massachusetts. It is my great honor to welcome Department of Trade and Industry Secretary, the Honorable Ramon Lopez. Secretary Mon.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mimi. To our fellow speakers, Mr. Gregory Banzon of Century Foods, Inc., Mr. Tomohiro Ando of JETRO Manila Investment and EPA Advisor, members of Security Bank's Board of Directors, clients of Security Bank, friends, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to you all. We'd like to thank Security Bank, in particular, President and CEO Sanjeev Vora, for inviting us to speak before you here at the 2021 Economic Forum. We hope that everyone here is well and keeping healthy and safe from COVID-19. Today, we wish to talk to you about the strong and present growth potential of Philippine manufacturing that will help our country recover not only from the recent economic challenges, but also prepare us for the future. With the rest of the world, the Philippines suffered economically due to the pandemic as our 2020 GDP hit a negative 9.5%. However, we've been seeing signs of recovery with the mitigation of quarter-on-quarter GDP declines in the second half of last year and into this year. While we had to implement additional community quarantine lockdowns in March and April of this year that affected our first quarter GDP, we are still on track for a V-shaped recovery of our economy. This is supported by the worldwide rollout of vaccines and the strategic reopening of economies around the world. Likewise, our macroeconomic indices are also pointing towards an overall improved Philippine investment climate for 2021 with the following. Unemployment rates dropped from 17.7% of April last year down to 7.1% this year and slowly returning to pre-pandemic levels of around 5% as we reopen the economy. The Philippines Manufacturing Purchasing Managers Index, PMI indices, ranging now from 49 to 52.5 this year, from a record low of 31.6 in April of 2020. That's brought about by the easing of quarantine restrictions, factory operations are resuming, and demand is picking up, fueled by increase in domestic and international orders. Improved vaccination rollout and recent decline of cases are easing restrictions as well, leading to businesses resuming operations. And the softening and the contraction of PMI new export orders index in April signals improving overseas demand for Philippine products. Exports are now up 31.6% year on year, the fastest expansion we've seen in more than 10 years due to the strong demand from major trading partners. The growth is not only due to the low base last year, but even versus the pre-pandemic level in 2019. FDI January-February amounting to 1.57 billion US dollars and noting a 20.6% increase year to date, and a 145% growth in FDI in the manufacturing sector points towards more sustainable and long-term growth of the sector. Meanwhile, approved investment registered by our Board of Investment showed sustained growth of 156% year on year in the first 2 months of this year, reaching 121 billion pesos or about 2.5 billion US dollars. Last year, despite the pandemic, BOI investment approvals hit 1.02 trillion pesos or 20.6 billion US dollars, the second highest mark in the agency's history of 1.14 trillion pesos or 23.4 billion US dollars in 2019. Amidst the pandemic, we need to stay on course when it comes to economic strategies and reforms. That is why we have been implementing the revitalizing businesses, investments, livelihoods, and domestic demand, or rebuild for short. That's a rebuild PH strategy since last year so that our country can bounce back. This is our economic recovery plan, anchored on a vision of President Rodrigo Roa Duterte to create a modern, dynamic, and responsible Philippine industry. The goals of Rebuild PH are the following. Number one, to reduce trade deficit, increase value creation, increase backward and forward linkages, and modernize Philippine industries. To achieve these goals, our board's broad strategies include revitalizing consumption to boost demand and empowering production capacities to meet the recovery in demand, which will encourage further increase in production, leading into a virtuous cycle. On the demand side, we have government support via economic stimulus to save thousands of companies to keep their jobs. These include legislation like the Bayanihan 1, Bayanihan 2, and there also is a discussion now for Bayanihan 3. This support will re-stimulate purchasing power and demand to attract more production activities and create a better business environment for investments. On the supply side, we should enhance production capacities in agriculture, industry, and services to help build our export competitiveness and manage imports. This creates a dynamic cycle of sustained and growing economic activity with strong domestic linkages. As part of Rebuild, the Philippines has the following strategies. Accelerate FDIs in sectors or areas that will provide for basic necessities such as food, health, and hygiene products. Support and accelerate the fourth IR in the country, which includes the adoption of smart manufacturing, digital technologies, and the manufacturing of components and devices that support this technological transformation. Another area is to address supply chain gaps to build stronger industrial baseline in the country, particularly for the basic industries like iron, steel, and chemicals, and then help to develop a more modern Philippines in terms of both digital and physical infrastructure and supporting the growth of transport mobility solutions. And last but not the least, to generate high value and greater number of jobs for our people. For each strategy or intervention, there are corresponding priority areas or sectors. These include providing basic necessities such as agribusiness, food manufacturing, health products, online education, and health services. Supporting for IR will include electrical and electronics industry, as well as innovation and R&D activities. Addressing supply chain gaps would include industries like tool and die, iron and steel, and chemicals. Developing a more modern Philippines, these include cold chain warehousing, auto and auto parts, smart cities and mobility solutions, and digital trade, among others. And generate high value job creation. This will include design oriented, furniture and garments, automotive, aerospace parts, tourism, creative content and services, and IT BPM. The recent performance of the manufacturing PMI, fueled by the increase in domestic demand, reinforces the importance of rebuild. We must continue to build consumer confidence, revitalize domestic demand, and empower manufacturing firms in the country to seize that demand. As such, the Department of Trade and Industry launched the Make It Happen in the Philippines International Investment Promotion Campaign to generate investment leads. Under this campaign, we've been focusing on promoting key industries that have the most potential for foreign investments. We have identified a couple: IT BPM sector, electronics, automotive, aerospace, copper, and nickel. Our IT BPM industry is the biggest job generator in the Philippines, contributing 1.23 million direct jobs and about 4 million indirect jobs. Given that we're the second most English proficient country in Asia, with a 98% literacy rate, the IT BPM industry is thriving in our country thanks to the following advantages we have to offer. This includes over 700,000 higher education graduates, 7,000 CPA board passers, and 2 million graduates of technical and vocational courses annually. We would like to point out that our BPOs have proven adaptability and resilience in the wake of COVID-19 through the following: quickly utilizing work from home arrangements, with 90% of its professionals adopting these measures, providing shuttles and accommodation for employees. The sector growing 1.8% in headcount and 1.4% in revenue, and the industry still looking at about 5 to 5.5% growth outlook for 2021. Thanks to their large contribution in export revenues, amounting close to $30 billion a year, the BPO industry is now officially part of the A4 priority group of our COVID-19 vaccine deployment plan as part of our economic frontliners. Although frankly, we're trying to expand the definition of economic frontliners to include all workers who have to go to their offices, to their workplace, riding the public transport system, as well as dealing with other people in their workplaces. We need to expand the definition of A4. So this was after the Interagency Task Force on Emerging Infectious Disease approval of DTI's endorsement of the inclusion of BPO in the A4 category. Moving forward, we believe artificial intelligence is the next higher value, higher paying service winner after the BPO industry, which is why we hope to establish the Philippines as an AI center for excellence in the region. Guided by our national AI roadmap, we will establish the private sector-led National Center for AI Research as the country's shared hub for AI research and home to full-time research scientists and research engineers. And backed by our rich local talent pool and vibrant innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem, we can serve as a big data processing hub, providing high-value data analytics and AI services to the world. Meanwhile, the electronics and semiconductor industry remains the top contributor to our total exports, accounting for around 62% or $39.6 billion in 2020. As of this March, electronic exports were among the country's top exports, with total earnings of $3.6 billion, accounting for 53.8% of total exports for the period. Year-on-year, electronic exports grew 25% as compared to March of 2020. Automotive industry. It covers a wide range from assembly, importation and distribution, rebuilding of motor vehicles, and the manufacture of automotive parts and components. Employing around 90,000 of our countrymen, the industry has 6 major assemblers, including global names like Toyota and Mitsubishi, and 6 major parts manufacturers. In relation to these, we have a developing electric vehicle industry which has an industry production capacity of 150,000 units. This is registered capacity in a year. With 45 industry players, it employs 14,840 Filipinos in EV manufacturing, parts manufacturing, as well as importers, dealers, traders, and service providers. In terms of the country's aerospace industry, the Philippines continues to be recognized in the global aerospace industry as a developing player in the industry value chain, employing around 6,000 Filipinos. The industry has capabilities in aerospace parts manufacturing, aircraft maintenance and repair, MRO, and aviation aerospace engineering trainings. With regard to the country's copper industry, the Philippines is home to an estimated 1.14 billion metric ton of copper reserves, reputed to be among the highest in the world, and fuels the global copper industry. The industry also employs 14,000 Filipinos and has an estimated value of more than $2 billion of annual copper exports. But more than just exporting, we want to establish a downstream copper industry in the Philippines. We envision a fully integrated Philippine copper industry through the development of a wire rod casting facility and higher value copper products. Hence, we launched the Master Development Plan for the Leyte Ecological Industrial Zone last year to achieve this goal. On a side note, we'd like to point out that the prices of copper in the global market have been hitting record highs of about $10,000 per metric ton this month. It settles now to about, I think, 9,900 as of yesterday. This is due to the demand being boosted by the copper's role in rapidly growing industrial sectors like electric vehicle batteries and semiconductor wiring, as well as broader economic recovery efforts. In relation to this, the Philippines has nickel reserves amounting to 2.05 billion, and the country's nickel industry employs 9,905 Filipinos in nickel mines and processing plants. The industry's GBA in the mining of nickel ores amounted to 4.18 billion pesos, or 11.8% of the total first quarter of 2021 GBA in mining and quarrying. To further prepare Philippine manufacturing for the future, DTI is pushing for smart manufacturing and digitalization. We need to ride the wave of digital transformation. Advanced manufacturing, which incorporates cutting-edge technological innovation to transform production and drive innovation, is at the heart of 4IR. To this end, we have initiatives supporting Industry 4.0 transformation, prominent being our Inclusive Innovation Industrial Strategy, or IQS, to grow innovative and globally competitive manufacturing, agriculture, and services. One example of this thrust is our scaling up of the Smart Industry Readiness Index initiative among manufacturing firms in partnership with Siemens. Likewise, we are planning to establish an Industry 4.0 pilot factory to facilitate the adoption of Industry 4.0 technologies in production operations of business, especially micro SMEs. We are also developing the Smart Manufacturing Transformation Support Program to provide support to manufacturers to sustain their Industry 4.0 adoption. To protect our industries, we are supporting the establishment of strict manufacturing standards, as well as implementing safeguards measures whenever necessary to protect local manufacturing against import surge and surge of cheaper imports, unfair trade. Concerning manufacturing standards, we are ensuring particular products like automotive products, they undergo mandatory certification scheme under the Bureau of Philippine Standards. Included also would be products like cement, steel, ceramic tiles, plywood, and other manufactured products. All these product audit and inspection, as well as testing, required before they are distributed or sold in the Philippine market. To date, BPS has certified around 2,000 local and foreign manufacturing companies under the Philippine Standards licensing scheme. They are also continuously developing and updating the standards for use in crafting of technical regulations to ensure safe and quality products. With safeguard measures, these are emergency trade remedy measures against large quantities of imported products that surge, that increase rapidly. And this is basically to protect the domestic industries to produce like or directly competitive products. These imported products shall have safeguard import duties, temporary in nature, added to them for a short corrective period to give local manufacturers just a breathing space to improve their competitiveness. Of the collected duties, 50% will be given to affected industries as a competitiveness enhancement measure fund to help them implement adjustment plans to make local products more competitive. With the full potential of these industries powering our post-pandemic economy, we aren't the only ones confident of our country's recovery. The World Bank projected the Philippines to rebound with 5.5% growth for 2021 and 6.3% in 2022. What's more, CEO Magazine identified Philippines as one of the 10 best countries to invest in post-COVID, dubbing the country as the tech hub of Asia. In the post-pandemic days ahead, we are confident that we can continue our country's strong economic growth story once more. Rebuilding the robust growth of Philippines will start from the strategies outlined under the Rebuild Initiative. This will hinge on key drivers that have enabled the Philippine economy to thrive in previous years. We would like to point out that even before the pandemic, the Philippines boasted very robust economic fundamentals, growing at an average of 6.6% from 2016 to 2019 and becoming the third fastest growing economy in Asia. This solid growth was supported by the resurgence in the manufacturing sector, which nearly accounted for 20% of our economy. The Philippines was also on the track to breach the $4,000 mark to become an upper middle income country by 2020 if COVID-19 did not happen. The Philippine economy's resilience may be attributed to one of the country's key advantages, its people. With 49 million highly skilled, educated, dedicated, cost-efficient workforce, easy to train, and with very low attrition rate, the country sits on a demographic sweet spot. Furthermore, our people are well known across the world as highly capable, hardworking, highly trainable, fluent in English, and with cost-competitive talent. We would also like to point out that the Philippines has had a lower number of strikes and blackouts as compared to other countries around us. The country's young and dynamic population not only boosts our domestic consumption and local demand, it also continues to use innovation as an engine for growth. In 2020, the Philippines placed 50th in the Global Innovation Index, its best rank ever. And just about 3 years before that, or 4 years before that, we were at 100th rank, now down to 50th. Additionally, the Philippines has preferential access in major markets through our free trade agreements, FTAs. We also continue to benefit from the EU's Generalized Scheme of Preferences Plus, or GSP Plus, the only nation in the ASEAN to do so. Likewise, we are currently working to push for more products to be included in the talks for the US GSP, which is under discussion for a renewal. These add to the value of making Philippines as a manufacturing location for foreign investors. The Philippines is also part of the RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, which is intended to create in the region a more business-friendly environment. RCEP will likewise encourage closer integration of economies and provide a more stable and predictable rules-based system of trade. And amidst the pandemic, the Philippines has also been proactive in enhancing strategic bilateral and regional relations with other trade partners, like the continuation of the Philippine-EU FTA. As our economy recovers, we are confident of achieving our pre-pandemic growth. To this end, we are facilitating greater trade and investment in the country by continuously pursuing reforms to foster a better business environment. That is why we have realized the game-changing corporate recovery and tax incentives for enterprises, or the CREATE Act, making the investment climate in the Philippines significantly more attractive. The CREATE Act will rationalize, modernize, and offer more relevant incentives to investors. At first, this will reduce the corporate income tax rate from 30% to 25% for large corporations and down to 20% for micro SMEs. This reduction will be crucial for businesses that wrestle with the disruption in supply chains and reduce the negative economic impact of the pandemic. Qualified activities or projects can also enjoy an incentive package for a maximum of 17 years. These include the 4 to 7 years of income tax holiday and a 5% special corporate income tax rate of 5 years for domestic market enterprises and for 10 years for export-oriented enterprises. More important is the removal of the export and nationality bias, which opens these incentives even to foreign investors that will target the domestic market as long as the business activity is in our strategic investments priorities plan. Currently being drafted by the Board of Investment, the SIPP is a list of activities that the Philippines want to incentivize or promote, since these activities provides benefits that can lead us to a more holistic growth as a nation. In the transition, the Fiscal Incentive Review Board, FIRB, has agreed to adopt the 2020 IPP of the BOI as the interim SIPP for this year, while the SIPP is being developed. Specific activities that are strategic for the country to produce may be included in the SIPP and avail of the incentives provided, such as the above-mentioned ITH, SCIT, and enhanced deduction. An example of the enhanced deduction under CREATE is the additional 50% deduction on power cost, direct labor use, and domestic input expense, which encourages companies to prefer local manufactured goods and local service providers that can boost micro SMEs growth. CREATE will serve as an important enabler in rebuilding and further strengthening our local industries. In particular, CREATE incentives aim to improve the overall investment environment with the reduction of the corporate income tax. This will also address binding constraints to industry development, encourage innovations, as well as sustained and inclusive manufacturing growth, develop human capital, and generate more jobs. We also remain committed in supporting liberalization to enhance our country's competitiveness. This means amending laws like the Retail Trade Liberalization Act, the Foreign Investment Act, and the Public Services Act, which have all been certified urgent by the President. And we see the Congress and the Senate now working hard on these economic reform measures as we speak. Together with CREATE, these reforms and the review of other economic restrictions being conducted by Congress with the intention of removing barriers for entry will attract more investments and create more jobs in the Philippines. To conclude, while the future of Philippine manufacturing appears bright and encouraging, we should remember that our efforts to strengthen our industries and attract more investments means the creation of more jobs and employment for our people. This is the true and ultimate goal of the Duterte administration, to give the Filipino a more comfortable and greater quality of life. Maraming salamat po at mabuhay tayong lahat.
Thank you very much, Secretary Lopez, for the presentation and for being with us today. We'll speak with you again later. Now, from a national perspective, we are now going to zoom into the private sector's viewpoint. Our next speaker is Century Pacific Food Inc.'s Executive Vice President and Chief Operations Officer, Mr. Gregory Banzon. Now, Mr. Banzon is the recipient of several awards, including the country's most prestigious marketing honor, the Agora Awards, where he was recognized in 3 different categories: Outstanding Achievement in Marketing Management in 2014, in Export Marketing for 2018, and Marketing Company of the Year in 2011. He is credited for leading the expansion of Century Pacific into the global stage. In 2017, he was awarded the CEO Excel Award for Business Communications by the International Association of Business Communications. Prior to Century Pacific, he held managing director roles at Johnson & Johnson and RFM, as well as key positions at Bayer and Citibank. Ladies and gentlemen, let's all give a virtual applause to Mr. Greg Banzon. Greg?
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me. I'm just trying to share my slide. I've been asked to give you an overview a bit on, I guess, a view from the manufacturing sector, particularly the food category. So long and short is, I guess, in quick terms, the category has been declining. The FMCG category was hit by the pandemic to the impact of about 7.5%. This gradually started to decline towards, especially as the pandemic hit, and continued to slip all the way up to about a 7.5% decline by the end of the year. So what drove the decline, or ironically, what was happening is that consumers are actually buying more every time they go to the supermarket or the sari-sari store or grocery store. But the key culprit in the decline, obviously, that happened is that consumers actually shopping more often. I'm sorry, shopping more per shopping trip, but going out less often. Obviously, there was a key issue in terms of their mobility. So if I were to drill down, if you see the slide, just to explain a little bit, the purple line there is what you would call the mobility index. At the height of the pandemic, consumers, of course, were locked down by way of ECQ, and it was long and hard lockdown, and at the same time fearful of going out in general. So that started to ease up towards the as the lockdowns were eased. But if you look at the green line, which is actually the shopping frequency index, you will see that it actually declined below the 100% or their previous practice, and never really recovered. The lowest was somewhere around 70, 75, high 70%, recovering a bit to about the mid 80s, and hovered at that level. So consumers were shopping less often, but the yellow line, or the mustard colored line there, you will see, is the shopping, the spend per trip index. You could see that they were actually spending higher than previous pre-pandemic, and hovered above that level, despite I guess the different levels of challenges on their mobility and their access to retail establishments. So they continued to avoid being exposed to the COVID virus by staying home more often, and every time they shopped, they actually were buying at larger quantities. So this was true across all channels. This chart from AC Nielsen will indicate to you whether it is a drugstore, or a supermarket, or a grocery department store, whatever. In general, the trend was that from 2020 into even into 2021 today, the shopping frequency is actually declining, and the percentage of visits dramatically lower. So just to walk you a bit through this chart, this actually talks about the number of channels a consumer would be visiting, as well as the percentage of patronage. So sad to say that it's a decline across both. Consumers are shopping in less number of channels. So from 2019 to 2021, an average of 7. 2020, it was still a bit high, but started to decline. And this year, consumers are only visiting an average of about 5 types of retail establishments on average. And then on the across socioeconomic classes, you will see that this doesn't really exempt any of the income classes. The ABC socioeconomic segment declines went from 8.8 in 2019 to 9.1 in 2020, and then a decline to about 6.2% in 2020, 6.2 types of stores in 2021. The DE class is also declining from 6.6 to 4.9. So this is just an indication that most, or across all types of retail establishments, the percentage of patronage has actually been declining. And I guess the more resilient ones would be sari-sari stores, because it's not actually, it is the highest penetration, and the percentage of penetration hasn't really declined from 98% to 94%. Grocery stores here you will see had a bit of a spike last year from 14% to 21%. And I'll talk a little bit more about this phenomenon in a while. Hardest hit, of course, by this development are the low income classes. You will see from this chart that the upper income segment is actually growing in terms of shop purchases in general. So the value growth is averaging at about 6% across the AB upper C socioeconomic segment. And when you go to the middle class, to the lower income class, you will see that the shopping frequencies actually declined on an annualized basis. And the spend per trip among middle income slightly higher, but the low income classes declining in terms of spend per trip. The reason why Century Pacific, I guess, has been somewhat insulated and continues to see growth is because food in general is the most resilient across key categories. So this chart pretty much just talks about or shows the different segments of food, non-food, and pharma products. And you can see here that even as food products experience a decline in terms of shopping frequency, these are cut up in quarterly reads from, let's say, about 100 to 99 trips per quarter. And declining somewhat to about at the height of the pandemic to about 81%, recovering a bit with the improvement in mobility to about 89. The spend per trip even is dramatically higher compared to pre-pandemic periods. Non-food is continues to have a lower priority, and the increase in their spend per trip isn't as high. So more evidence that the food category is suffering the least is that if you cut it up further between food and beverage, food here shows higher frequency, lower frequency in terms of overall comparison to previous period, but it's the highest frequency shopping trip of a consumer. So on an annualized basis, a consumer would go to an establishment to buy food at least 246 times a year, compared to the other categories as personal care and household and home care, but is dramatically lower than previous practice. However, as I've mentioned, in terms of spend per trip, food continues to be higher, and the growth is higher compared to all the other key categories. So the pandemic has actually created like a shift in terms of what consumers are willing to buy, or in terms of their priorities and what they were going to buy. Here you could see the top 10 items consumers are spending on, or in terms of consumption. Food being the highest. It is on a growth trajectory, given that in terms of their shopping, they buy more food for home because there is no dining out. More families are actually just eating in, and there are more family members at home because of the work from home phenomenon and learn from home phenomena. So electronics is also on the rise, as I mentioned, because of work from home, and as students are actually sheltered at home as they go to class. So medical expenses, of course, is also in the rise, given the investments that we're seeing in terms of health and immunity, driving health and immunity. And savings is also increasing or improving because of less transport and less expenses on their day-to-day. But more importantly, many have realized or are fearful of the uncertainties of job loss, therefore setting aside money to be able to weather even harder times. Another phenomenon that we've seen is the increased brand loyalty. So despite the pandemic, especially on the food space or in the food space, consumers continue to buy brands that they trust. I think the shopping trips have increased, but the time spent in the stores is actually less. So for example, if in the past a consumer would spend 30 minutes to 45 minutes in a shopping trip in a supermarket, that's been dramatically reduced. And what they do is they immediately go to their trusted brands to make their shopping trip faster, fearful of the virus. But what we've seen as well is that as they continue to buy the same brand, we are starting to see this phenomenon of trading down. Our small SKUs, for example, is leading the growth, um, uh, and the disparity would be in the let's say high 20s for small SKUs, and maybe the regular products would be still growing, but in the single digit levels. So Century Pacific has always been driven by our mission of providing uh, um, affordable nutrition to our key consumers, delighting and nourishing everyone, everywhere, every day is what we say to ourselves in terms of the work that we put in. And it's actually spelled pretty well for us, worked out pretty well for us, driven by that mission, because it was actually what consumers were looking for, affordable nutrition and being delighted everywhere, every day, for everyone. So we did both, ensuring supply despite the pandemic and the difficulties of the challenges of the supply chain as the pandemic hit and lockdowns and supply chain disruptions happened. And it was, I guess, the key driver of the performance for 2020 and what we continue to see for 2021. An example of this, for example, is in the dairy space. This has been our key growth driver over the last 3-4 years, where we've seen north of about 20% up on a compounded annual growth average. And you can see that the idea of providing affordable nutrition by democratizing the benefits of milk across the country through affordable price has enabled us to fuel that growth and achieve strong market share gains. So the other thing is that despite the pandemic, or even at the height of the pandemic, because of the increasing demand that we saw for the brands, we've really pushed in being able to respond to it. And on the tuna side of our business, we've even actually expanded our operations by adding as much as about 1,800 new jobs, and built a new tuna factory to cope with increasing demand both domestically and internationally. We were able to do this, I guess, by way of really working towards ensuring the safety of our employees. This just gives you a snapshot of the scope of management in terms of the number of people that we need to protect as they produce the products that, as I was articulating, that consumers continue to patronize. On any given day, we're looking after at least about 15,000 plant workers scattered across different manufacturing sites. So it's not really rocket science. Health and safety of our employees were ensured across this pandemic by way of very simple plant preventive measures, which we adopted. These are what the IATF and the World Health Organization and the DOH have recommended. It's just a matter of aggressive and consistent application. And as a result, we've been able to sustain our operations running at about almost 90% capacity utilization. In some cases, as we've reported to the DTI, we've had 95, 98% capacity utilization in some months, and been able to protect those 15,000 or so employees across the past 436 days, I guess, from last March, from any workplace transmission of the virus. So our safety scorecard in terms of COVID prevention is at 99.9%, actually 99.99%. Because of across the 15,000 employees, 436 days, we've had less than 30 infections, and mostly coming from community spread. So I guess the key lesson there is that demand is there. You need to be able to get the supply going. Key for you to be able to play a role in the community or in the country as a food supplier or provider is efficient operations, and efficiency starts with the health and safety of our employees. So, moreover, I guess this slide makes is testament that it is preventable. We should be able to control this virus by way of process, and as evidenced by how we've been able to contain it in our plants. So, going back to, I guess, a broader picture view of where the country is going, especially in the manufacturing space in food. This is our view in terms of path to recovery. Food will continue to lead the recovery. Here you will see slides from the Kantar home panel in terms of the trended, based on where things are going now, trended growth rates across the different categories. Personal care and home care took a big hit last year, but are slowly starting to bounce back. So their growth would be somewhere around in the very low single-digit levels. The good news is food is is accelerating to slightly faster at 3.7% in terms of the view for the at least year on year, and it didn't really see that much of a decline, but it's starting to see a bit of an acceleration that we think will continue to grow over the coming months. Beverages and dairy, more beverage actually than dairy, is also seeing a recovery of about 1.3% year on year. So what's driving the growth and the recovery through the food industry or the food category? So one of the most obvious is more home cooking. This is what you would call the people are in lockdown, and Filipino resiliency and Filipino care for their family is starting to kick in. So there's a lot of home cooking driven by two factors. One is consumers or the population start trying to survive as they get laid off, for example, or are unable to optimize their productivity. They go into home-based food businesses, and we've seen a very dramatic increase in demand for food preparation products that are actually being used to provide as inputs to businesses that consumers have been selling through both aggressively through online channels as well as through a network of friends and neighbors and connections. So the other thing is that as most consumers are not venturing out, are eating out less, households and homemakers are trying to replicate that experience of being able to eat out and making their dining experiences similar to what you would experience outside. So a lot of homemakers are tidying up their homes and making the meals as a important, I guess, punctuation of each day. The other thing is that a good percentage of consumers are actually using cooking as well and baking as a way of being able to escape and to maybe try to I guess be sort of like a creative outlet while being stuck at home. So we've seen these trends especially online where people post their creations like dalgona coffee, baked sushi, and banana bread either for creative outlet as a creative outlet or as a business. The other thing that will drive growth would be the resurgence of the neighborhood stores or sari-sari stores. Here you will see, if I may articulate, the sari-sari stores, as I mentioned earlier, was actually the most resilient in terms of channels. Past 3 months patronage continues to be very high in the high 90s. So it's the go-to channel for most households. So they continue to be in the 90s. Frequency of visit per month is increasing into 2021. even as the number of channels visited by consumers actually down, as I mentioned earlier, from 7.1 down to 5.2. The frequency of visits to sari-sari stores have actually been increasing. The other thing we're seeing is that the spend per trip or per month in sari-sari stores is actually higher. That's a very dramatic 18 to 20% improvement from previous periods. So you can see that the average spend per month in sari-sari stores is already up to 917 pesos versus 790 pesos in the past. And then spend per trip is higher at 40 pesos. And you could see in terms of how consumers are coping, a very dramatic increase in sari-sari store openings. I think Secretary Mon knows this data very well. The number of new businesses registered in 2020, there are an additional 140,000 sari-sari stores that opened up. In response to maybe people being displaced and needing to have another source of income, and as much as almost 90,000 online retail shops opening up in 2020 alone. So that's Filipino resilience, and it's providing like a better mix of shopping options for consumers. So you have your traditional supermarkets there, obviously, but whereas the convenience stores and mini supermarkets used to be more of like a top up and a incidental purchase, now they've become like a go-to channel because of accessibility. People are venturing less. Trying to stay closer to home and shopping closer to home rather than having to go venture out to different parts of their community. Online shopping is obvious, a very dramatic growth, and sari-sari stores continue to be there. The chart here, you will see that sari-sari stores actually rebounded dramatically and has actually overtaken supermarkets again, especially as lockdowns have eased, and because consumers as I mentioned, prefer not to venture out too far from home. The online channel is growing dramatically. Penetration total is about 4.5%, but value growth is dramatic at 150 plus almost 150%. So the online channel in terms of food in the food category, or at least an FMCG, is still pretty small in terms of contribution, single digit. But the growth is dramatic, and penetration. We saw the number earlier as total penetration is 4.4% across different categories, but on food it's already about to breach single digit. It's closer to 9 to 10% penetration already for this channel. And across different brands, Shopee at 86% purchase incidence, Lazada at 69%. Being more, I guess, segmented towards an older consumer set. There's a lot of purchases being happening in Facebook Marketplace and in groups at 41%, high skew towards women, Food Panda 41%, and Grab continues to grow. The online channel, I think, is what's going to drive some growth. Here you will see that there's already a strong, what you would call portfolio type of purchase practice. 38% continue to be hardcore brick and mortar only, but a big 61% are already what you would call combined channels of both brick and mortar or offline and online shoppers. And penetration is relatively high across different categories for online shopping. So fearless forecast is that FMCG will probably grow about 3%, with a bit of a surge towards Q2, and because Q3 and Q4 last year were slightly higher, the growth is going to ease up a bit to maybe about 2 to 3%. But that remains to be seen, given that consumers have become more resilient. So we're sharing the view of what Kantar is saying, is that FMCG can grow at least about 3 to 5% or so. In terms of the outlook for recovery, the sari-sari stores and the mini market convenience store channels will be a key driver of growth. I think sari-sari stores will sell a broader range of products because they realize that the neighborhoods that they cater to have actually been going to them for more frequently with higher basket size demand and asking for different sorts of items to purchase, not only the traditional stuff. I guess key is the what's limiting or what's impacting on shopping behavior is really mobility and fear. So the vaccination program is definitely going to help ease a lot of that fear. I think it will. I support that view of providing a vaccination pass might help. Also help consumers be more adventurous or open to eating out more and shopping more frequently. And while we need to continue imposing safety protocols, nakaka-addict yung paggamit ng online shopping. So I think it is here to stay. So the pandemic has actually forced a lot of people from a very low penetration rate of online shopping to now, as I mentioned, a blended source of purchase at 61%, both online, offline. So that's going to stay. But as they venture out more often, I think you'll have online shopping continue, but it will the growth will quiet down a bit into the future. So that's what I have. I think it's a little bit more optimistic, but yeah, in general, consumers are cautiously starting to go out, spend a little more. They actually spend more per trip, but if we can encourage them to be more mobile, less fearful of the virus, then you'll have maybe an acceleration of the growth towards the second half of the year and continued acceleration towards next year. That's it.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Banzon. Lots to take away from your presentation. We truly appreciate the insights. Now on to our last speaker for today, who will elaborate on what the Philippines can do to encourage more foreign direct investments, especially in the manufacturing industry. Mr. Tomohiro Ando has been with the Japan External Trade Office, or JETRO, for over 3 decades, having spent majority of his professional career in overseas assignments focused on promoting trade and investment in diverse industries such as agriculture, fisheries, forestry, and food. He also served as an economist during the earlier years of his career with JETRO. Now, prior to his assignment in the Philippines, he spent several years in the JETRO offices in Sri Lanka and Myanmar. From 2013 to 2017, he served as the executive director of JETRO Manila, and in 2018, he returned to the Philippines as the investment and EPA advisor. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Tomohiro Ando.
Good morning. Let me take some time to share my presentation. Honorable Secretary Ramon Lopez, Secretary of DTI, Mr. Greg Banzon, Executive Vice President and COO of Century Pacific Group, Mr. Sanjeev Vola, President and CEO of Security Bank, distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is my pleasure and privilege to make a presentation in this webinar. I feel especially honored because I can share this opportunity with Honorable Ramon Lopez. JETRO and myself would like to express a special thanks to you, taking this opportunity for your kind guidance and advice and support to us always. Thank you very much, sir. And before starting my presentation, please let me shortly explain about JETRO itself. We are one of Japanese semi-governmental body. Original body was established as a special corporation in 1985. Then after that, it was given present legal status and nature in 2003 under Act of number 172 of 2003. In the past decades, we have developed our network both inside and outside of Japan. Now we have more than 70 overseas offices in around 50 countries, and the regional offices in Japan in every prefecture. We are under Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry of Japan, and that is the reason why we are more business-oriented in comparison with JICA, which is Body for Foreign Aid and Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan. Our task is to promote trade and investment between Japan and any business partner in the world. A little bit more concretely, these four pillars are our function. And my duty is included in the first one, to support overseas business of Japanese companies, including direct investment overseas and the providing supporting function to the existing Japanese affiliate overseas. And today's presentation, I'd like to use the outcome from the fourth item of this pillar. Then let me start the major part of presentation. The subject given to me today is what can the Philippines do to attract and encourage more foreign direct investment into the manufacturing industry. I'm afraid that I cannot provide simple direct answer to this question because the matter depends on plural factors, and some factors are not, and some factors are uncertain and not controllable. But I also believe that having objective and comparative viewpoint to know the position of the Philippines in the region would be more or less beneficial to all the persons who are interested in the subject. Therefore, I'd like to pick up some facts and figures, mainly from our original survey conducted among Japanese affiliates in Asia and Oceania, and some other open sources. Though I prepared many slides, please allow me to skip some of them because of time constraint. Now, this is the front page of our original survey. We have been conducting this survey since 2002. Then this one provides many figure and information for you, but because I don't have enough time to present all, therefore, please take your time if you are interested in downloading this from our website. This is free of charge and available for all internet users. Then the first subject is one commonly serious in the region, and that is the labor cost. And this table shows the percentage of the respondent to the survey who thinks the wage hike is one of the serious management matter. Then apparently the ratio is much lower in the Philippines in comparison with other countries in Asia. Then this is because we also asked the respondent that how much is the per head monthly basic salary in manufacturing sector, the monthly basic salary for operators. Then I pick up the time series data from the previous editions, and apparently the even on US dollar basis, the per head salary in the Philippines has been much more stable than other countries in Asia. For example, in Vietnam, it was just half of the Philippines in 2011, but it became more than double within 10 years in the past. But I think most of the Japanese business people's perception is, oh, in Vietnam, the labor cost is around half of the Philippines. But actual situation is this much different. Then I'd like to point out that even though the US dollar basis labor cost in the Philippines has been almost unchanged in 2010, but it is not caused by, it is not because of the, how should I say, even though the Filipino peso basis salary has been increasing even among Japanese affiliates in the Philippines. It was around 5% per annum. But because of the foreign exchange rate change in the past, this increase was offset on US dollar terms. This chart can provide such kind of background for your reference. But in the past 1 year and several months, the Filipino peso exchange rate has been appreciated against US dollar by 5%. This is another factor that we have to take into account in short term. Then related to the labor, I'd like to point out the abundance of human resources. This is already mentioned by Honorable Secretary, but I'd like to show another example of presentation, how impressively we can show the abundance of human resource in the Philippines. This one is based on UN statistics, assuming the population of productive age as one in 2015, then this one can show how rapidly the productive age population growth in the Philippines. Of course, the absolute number of the productive age population in the Philippines is not more than Indonesia, but we can show how it is more rapid than other countries. Then the next one is related local procurement among Japanese affiliates in respective countries. This one shows the percentage of local procurement in their total procurement. And this one is not evidence of the Filipino advantage, actually. This is weak point, but I dare to share this one because it is very important for us to have an objective point of view. Then this ratio has been around 30% more than 10 years in the Philippines. Then, of course, this one shows the supply chain development is one of the serious subjects for the manufacturing industry development in the Philippines. But at the same time, I'd like to point out another fact. This is as an advantage, comparative advantage of the Philippines. We ask in the same original survey, how much is the manufacturing cost in your country? Supposing that the manufacturing cost in Japan at 100, then almost every year in the past, the Philippines had been the most competitive among these countries in the table. Then in 2020, the Philippines was the second most competitive, and the figure became worth 2.2 notches. And in short term, we have to pay attention to this fact. But in general, Philippines has been competitive, even in cost competitiveness wise. And related to this subject, I'd like to quote one statistical figure from IMF database related to the increase in 2020. According to IMF database, Philippines experienced increase of inflation rate at the end of the year basis. In comparison with 2019, Philippines, the inflation rate in the Philippines increased despite the economic recession. Then, to be fair, I checked the annual average basis inflation rate in respective years, then once again, Philippines recorded slightly enhanced inflation rate in 2020. Then on this basis, even Vietnam, we could observe the enhanced inflation rate. But in Vietnam, the economy recorded the positive growth in a year. On the contrary to most of the other Asian countries, excluding China. Therefore, the situation in the Philippines is something unique. In this point is my finding. So together with that exchange rate change in the short term, even though the Philippines has the sudden advantage or competitiveness against the competitors, we have to take this kind of factor into account when we evaluate the competitiveness of the Philippines in short term. Yeah, then I'd like to quote another table from the same study, same survey. Let me enlarge. Can you see the figures? Sorry. We ask in this survey the COVID-19 and other factors. That such factor affect your business plan in the near future. Then regarding the plan to review production site, the 75% of the total respondent said that yes, we have the plan to review the production site in the world or in the region. And in ASEAN, that rate was 5.3, and in China it was 7.2. This figure was a little bit less than the result of the similar type of question in the edition of 2019, the previous edition of the same survey. Then at a total 7.2, this figure is before COVID, of course. In those days, 7.2% of total respondent answered that they were planning to transfer their production site. Therefore, around 2 notches, the percentage of the respondent who are planning to change their production site, change or diversify their production site has decreased under this situation. Therefore, in general, the given condition to invite, to promote the incoming foreign direct investment in this region has become more challenging for us. Then now the time is already almost over. I'd like to conclude my presentation as with this summary. Regarding the advantages of merits of the Philippines as host country of manufacturing direct investment, the abundant human resource and competitiveness in certain type of manufacturing and future growth. And even though I did not mention in the explanation presentation, but English linguistic business environment. And recent challenge is the cost increase and related to this enhanced inflation under recession and difficulty in technological exchange. By this, I mean under this situation, the Japanese manufacturer, not only Japanese, but manufacturers can find the difficulty in inviting short-staying technical expert to install their manufacturing facility to start new production line or for a calibration of their manufacturing equipment. That is one of the serious matter. Then a restriction and uncertainty. This is mainly caused by COVID-19. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you very, very much for your kind attention. And even though I could not explain everything today, but I'm ready to discuss some matter even after this event. Please don't hesitate, contact me or JETRO through this email address. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ando, and to our dear speakers, from Make It Happen Philippines to stimulating Filipino consumption to attracting foreign money. Certainly lots to think about from the presentations we saw this morning. Now, at this point, we would like to invite back on screen the Honorable Trade Secretary Ramon Lopez. He will be later joined by a colleague from DTI, Mr. Greg Banzon, and of course, Mr. Tomohiro Ando, to take questions from the audience members live. We will try to go through as many questions as we can, so join the discussion and send in your questions through the Q&A function on your screens. Now, before that, I would like to first share the results of the poll questions that were answered by the audience members when they registered for the event. Okay, let's bring out the first question. So the first poll question asked, are you optimistic about the overall recovery of the Philippine manufacturing industry within the span of 2021 to 2022? And let's see how you guys answered. 73% said yes, 27% said no. Maybe we can ask Secretary Mon Lopez, sir, what do you think of the audience's response?
Okay, yeah, thank you, Michelle. Of course, we would agree with the audience, the majority of the audience. The Philippine economy, despite the challenges now, does not lose the core economic fundamentals. I'm referring basically to the large consumer market. And I would say that it can easily bounce back once jobs are back, income is back, and the demand will definitely go back immediately. We are basically a consumption-driven nation, but that consumption and demand is the one driving and encouraging increases in production capacity, whether they're done by local guys, domestic manufacturers, or even foreign investors investing into the country. So that's one basic advantage that we have. And of course, with that large demographic that serves as a consumer market, that's also a source of talent pool. I mean, we're talking of manpower resources, explain the positive attributes, and these are also cited by the foreign investors that are really coming to the country as to the reasons and why they come to the Philippines. If they sound, the cliche story, but they are really the positive attributes, and that rich talent pool. Definitely, we will attract more investors. And of course, we've mentioned all the economic reforms, opening up the economy, more investors, easing up foreign equity restriction, as well as to build the infrastructure, the aggressive infrastructure. So all this taken together definitely is preparing the economy and the country for much more investments and, of course, bringing back jobs.
Mm-hmm. Secretary, just to follow up there, why is it taking longer? Why does it feel like, restarting and reviving the manufacturing industry in the Philippines is taking much longer compared to other countries? Because clearly the manufacturing recovery is humming along. You just have to look at industrial stocks. They're rising. The Baltic Dry Index, which is a leading indicator for bulk shipping for the input, demand for input that will be used to manufacture the finished goods, they're all up But is the Philippines part of that recovery right now? Because according to the latest PSA data, which was released in May for the month of March, our average capacity utilization rate for the manufacturing sector is still at 60%. We barely moved. In fact, I think that's even lower than the utilization rate back in October last year when we were hitting 69%.
Yeah, but if you think about it, we're really hampered right now by all this, back and forth in terms of community quarantine, ECQ, MECQ. But the positive side to this is, as Greg mentioned earlier, with this kind of lockdowns that we have, we prioritize basically manufacturing as continuing 100%, like basic food, the essential products, even exports, even IT BPM, we allow them 100%, even in an ECQ setup. So, and that's the reason why we've seen PMI to go above 50. Remember, we've reached 52.5. It dipped a bit to 49.9. But I think we are already reaching that capacity where we ought to be, above 50%. And then that's a good indication. And of course, at that, as we continue to reopen the economy, definitely with more people going out and earning back the income or regaining the job that we have, then of course that will lead to, the recovery, of the economy.
Okay, thank you very much, Secretary. Now on to our second poll question. We asked, do you agree that restoring consumer confidence should be a major factor to consider in the country's economic recovery? And let's see how you answered. 96% said yes, 4% said no. Let's have Century Pacific Foods' Greg Banzon react to this. Hi, Greg.
Yes, hello.
Greg, I know that you are a staple, and in fact, last year was a very good year. And in fact, first quarter of this year, you even posted a 24% growth in earnings to 1.4 billion. But when you look at consumer confidence beyond the staples, what are you seeing? Because unemployment rate remains elevated. People who have jobs are either paid less or are working fewer hours. Greg?
Okay. Hello.
Hi, Greg. Yes.
Yeah, I'm unmuting.
Okay. So what do you think of consumer confidence beyond the staples?
Yeah. Can you hear me already?
Yes.
Okay. So as I was saying, I think consumers are just waiting for, there's a lot of pent up demand. They're waiting to be able to go out and I guess live their lives in as normal a manner as possible. To a certain extent, if you look at the different levels of community quarantine, you've seen how consumers have adopted, and our view is that they continue to consume, but in different ways. So beyond the basics, I think what's going to happen is, as we've seen, for example, on seasonal demand, consumers are going to use some of their spending to maybe just try to get a semblance of back to normal. And as vaccinations, the level of vaccinations will increase, that you will continue to have more and more consumers being able to live out their lives in a normal manner as possible. And but more importantly, I think what they're doing is there's now a new keen sense of priority. So there's a lot of investments going into being able to provide continued education for the kids, provide as much savings as possible, and thinking of being able to invest some of that savings into businesses like Sari Sari Store, as you've seen, a very dramatic rise. So all of that will probably snowball into the resurgence, I guess, of overall consumption as well as economic activity. Prior to the pandemic, we could see like a continuous growth trajectory, that's what you would call the Filipino spirit of an entrepreneurship. It's been building up over the many years. I don't think a pandemic will stamp that out easily. So people are starting to cope, find ways to be able to continue to be productive and earn income, pandemic notwithstanding. And there are a lot of bright spots that we're already seeing, either by offline businesses and online businesses.
But Greg, you do have a very global view as well, because you're big in the Philippines, but your products are supported all over the world. In fact, you've got
Right.
offices in Vietnam, the US, and China. You also, while most of the products you sell abroad are still made locally in the Philippines, I understand you've engaged toll manufacturing service providers. In Brazil, for example, or in the Middle East, in Australia, the UAE. So when you look at consumer confidence in the Philippines, how do we compare to the confidence of consumers in the other countries where you're present?
I think we're more resilient. As I said, in terms of basket size, consumers buy a lot more here compared to pre-pandemic.
And that's not the case in other territories?
What we're seeing is we're continuing to grow dramatically internationally, but it's a combination of there was a surge last year, and it's pretty much tapered off over the last few months. But what they're doing now is they're stocking up and buying more for emergency, but their consumption patterns seem to be more I guess predictable and stable, rather than here that we tend to be more I guess indulgent. So yeah, the difference we're seeing is that consumers are cooking more at home globally, but as opposed to here in the Philippines, pinapaganda natin eh. We take pains and make the effort to make the dining experience or the home experiences, whether it's eating out or sharing experiences, watching TV or whatever it is that they're doing. That culture of caring and sharing things with moments with the family is stronger here. As opposed to the US, they're very independent, fewer people at home, or they continue to pretty much just consume what they, in terms of a basic standard, a continuity of that, but more of keeping stock in their cupboards and making sure that there's something to eat in case lockdowns happen again.
Okay, Filipinos do everything with a flair, really. And now to our final poll question. We asked, do you feel confident that foreign direct investments into the country will continue to expand? And let's see, let's get the numbers out. Who said yes, who said no? 67% said yes, and 33% said no, they don't feel confident. Mr. Ando, may we get your thoughts on the third poll question about FDIs? Because the inflows that we're getting in the Philippines are largely from countries like Japan or the US. What are your thoughts on this? And for those who have been closely monitoring FDIs, for the Philippines, we have been on a downtrend ever since we peaked in 2017 at $10.3 billion. When do you expect the Philippines to set another record in FDIs? Mr. Ando?
Yeah. I think in short term, the given situation is challenging actually, but in longer term, we can expect the different situation. I think because of the the comparative advantage of the Philippines, as I mentioned in the presentation of mine, then to promote or enhance the possibility, the important thing is to show the fact, to show the tangible and the countable fact to the potential investor. Like actually, I could learn a lot from Mr. Banzon's presentation today. It provides a very, how should I say, numerical figure of the market in very comprehensible, easy to understand manner. So even the fact related to export mentioned by Honorable Secretary in his presentation, the export recovery, the Philippine recovery of the export on monthly basis can show the capability of the Philippines to play a role as one of the regional global production network. So by showing such kind of facts, even though it may be a bit challenging in the short term, but in mid and long term, we can still find a probability to attract their concern.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Ando. So let's keep the ball rolling with the open forum now. We've actually collected questions from audience of the members. For those who haven't sent questions yet, please feel free to join in. Just type in your questions in the Q&A functions on your. Let's start with question number 1. This is actually directed for all of our speakers. Generally speaking, what is your assessment of the Philippine economy in the next 2 to 5 years, and how affected by the ongoing vaccine rollout? So I guess we can start with Mr. Banzon, and then we go to Secretary Mon, and then Mr. Ando.
Yeah, we continue to be very bullish. Food is a very basic requirement for all households and internationally. We have been growing our international network. We are now present in 80 countries and continue to see a growth of 20% or more year on year. And then here domestically, despite the surge from last year, our year-to-date growth continues to be at double-digit levels, net of what you would call the pandemic surge from last year. So we've projected into the next 5 years or so what the requirements will be in terms of consumer and retailer preferences. And I think the large population base, despite I guess whatever economic situation consumers will go through, as evidence as last year is very, very dire, but they continue to consume. So that's why we're very optimistic for at least for the food sector. And as you've seen in terms of personal care and even on pharma products, you're seeing maybe more of stability and slight rebound, given that consumers feel a little bit more confident. The vaccine rollout is a key and important element in making this happen. We've joined the different let's say private sector groups in tripartite agreements with the government to provide vaccine allocations for our employees. So it's a matter of being able to bring that in here and execute. But so far, we've encouraged employees to not wait for the private sector initiative and to get themselves vaccinated. And we've seen numbers as high as about 70 to 75% willingness to get this going.
Okay, let's hear from Secretary Mon.
Yeah, thanks, Mimi. Yeah, on this question, let me reiterate the ongoing reform. No? We're staying on the course despite the fact that we are fighting the pandemic on one side, but definitely the economic reforms we're pursuing is the one that will prepare the country to have a better business environment. What are those? These are, again, first, we already passed the CREATE. We expect to have the 3 urgent bills to be passed, the Retail Trade Law, the PSA, Public Service Act, as well as the Foreign Investment Act, all with the same intention of easing foreign equity restrictions that country has. And with that, we expect, therefore, a huge amount of investments to come in. Hopefully, that will be reflected in the FDI. Year to date, as reported earlier, actually FDI started to grow. Yes, there was a decline last year, but this year we are seeing already positive growth on the FDI. not also all these economic reforms, which many investors are telling us are really important for them to come in, are now happening. The create is the one that gives better, incentive package, as mentioned, of almost 17 years of tax holidays and coupled with the lower corporate income tax rate and enhanced deduction. And by the way, if you missed in the talk, the enhanced deduction can cover extra incentives if you hire locally, if you buy your inputs locally, no, or of course the domestic power that you use. That's one way to more or less level the playing field, because power cost is often cited as a pain point in the country. And so it's already part of the enhanced deduction. That's additional 50% deduction. And of course, additional 100% deduction when it comes to R&D and training. So a lot of incentives and have been prepared under CREATE. And of course, the easing of equity restriction. Um, our friend, Mr. Ando-san, also included future growth. And I think that is very much reliant on the size of the market here. And of course, that market also serves as a source of talent pool. Now, the vaccine rollout definitely is key, and we expect bulk of the vaccines to come in this second quarter and into the third quarter. Mm-hmm. And we have a proposal to focus on centers of gravity, meaning the NCR plus 8 areas, because that is where these areas are densely populated. These used to be hotspots, and these are also the centers of economic activity. So if we are able to reach first the herd immunity or herd containment in those areas, you're basically achieving a faster herd immunity, in a shorter period of time. And that's really important. That will allow us to recover faster. There's also talks now that in the for the economic frontliners, we want to more or less liberalize and expand that list. Because after prioritizing A1, A2, A3, these are the health workers, the senior comorbidities, which are really very important to prioritize. Beyond those sectors, actually, we want a kind of rollout that will be accelerated. And for us to accelerate and increase the number of jobs per day to 500,000, we definitely have to more or less open up the balance, the economy, and try to vaccinate as many as possible. And of course, with millions of vaccines arriving, millions of doses arriving, we definitely have to increase also the ability to vaccinate, and then of course open up the rest of the population so that we can vaccinate as many as possible per day. So with the rollout, again, it will allow us to reopen more, increase more consumer confidence that will lead into business confidence. So with this assessment, we are more positive and still very bullish. As mentioned, Philippines has that economic fundamentals that will immediately drive up.
Okay, on that very optimistic note, thank you, Secretary. Let's now go to Mr. Ando.
Because I don't have my own estimate or forecast, but I'd like to share. I'd like to share this chart from IMF. They have renewed the estimate of economic growth in US dollar terms in their 2002. This is 2020. I wrote that this must be 2021 April edition. So before COVID and after COVID, it was renewed, and the reaching the 500 billion US dollar level is delayed around 1 year, but still in the near future, I'd like to point out, the delay is not the point I'd like to emphasize, but I'd like to emphasize that even after the renewal of the estimate, within the very near future, the per head GDP of the Philippines will be around 5,000 US. The future growth I mentioned, it's this even after revised estimate, the growth of the Philippines is, how should I say, something impressive to the potential investor. This is one of the effective factor to attract the people overseas to the Philippines. That is the point I'd like to mention. Yeah,
thank you very much for that, Mr. Ando. Here's a question for Mr. Banzon. As we are more of an import-dependent country, do you think sustaining the import drive, will be a good strategy post-pandemic? Or do you think we should also start looking at being more competitive in exports? Greg?
Yeah, good. Can you hear?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so thanks. Yes, what we've done is we continue to evaluate opportunities for finding local components for our products, and over time has been increasing the percentage. That's on a micro level, at least within this company. The importance, I guess, is to be able to stabilize the overall supply chain. We look at opportunities to source from multiple sites so as not to disrupt our supply chain and continue the growth trajectory. But while we do that, it's a good balance between domestic component and imported components. The pandemic has made us realize that you have to have like multiple sources, both I guess ideally if Philippine source, but if that's not possible, then the obvious option is to go abroad. But what we've learned is it's no longer I guess wise to have like a very large dependence on single or fewer suppliers. So yeah, I think it's part of the need to continue to be creative, not only in terms of manufacturing inputs, but what we are trying to churn out as products as well. So we've shifted from, or we continue to grow our traditional products, but we've shifted our portfolio of business by way of introducing, let's say, a dairy component to our portfolio, and of late we've gone into plant-based, which has a load of opportunities for locally sourced product or inputs into the product. So over the long term, we think plant-based food items will be a key growth driver for the food industry, if not not only as a growth driver, but in terms of like shifting consumer habits to eating healthier. So that's where we're making a big investment on in terms of manufacturing capability, product development, brand development, not only here in the Philippines, but we're really pushing this internationally as well. So that's going to help, I guess, sustain growth as well as stability of our overall business portfolio.
Okay, thank you for that, Greg. Here's a question for Secretary Mon. What products or businesses in the manufacturing industry have proved to be resilient, and those that you expect will continue to spur economic growth? And in addition to this, sir, do you find that this pandemic has taught us that we need to be producing more of the medical equipment, more on the science manufacturing as well?
Yes. Okay. Let me answer. For a while, I have no audio. Of course, what products, businesses in the manufacturing improvement, of course, the basic industries, those that are the essentials, as we call it, food manufacturing. That's why we kept them at 100% operation despite ECQ. Pharmaceuticals, personal care products, the fast-moving consumer goods. Those are definitely resilient in times of the pandemic. Those operations continue to be 100%. And by the way, the reason why our economy was sort of still moving was because we allowed cargo movements, workers movement to be unhampered, even in times of ECQ, basically to allow the operations of the essential businesses. And of course, what is the outlook on contactless transaction? Definitely very bright, because as we saw even last year, there was a big jump in online businesses transactions. From 1,700 registered businesses in online business model, it grew to 88,000. No, more than 40 times jump just within the year. So definitely, and that growth continues in 2021. We still see about 30% growth year on year this year versus last year. So we expect that this is really the new business model. I think even as we survive and overcome the pandemic, I think the e-commerce definitely is one that has really grown, and we have basically accelerated. We have an e-commerce roadmap. We're talking of increasing the value contribution from e-commerce from 3% to 5% of GDP. Transactions for enterprises from 500,000 to 1 million by 2022. So these are the kinds of growth rates we expect on e-commerce and contact digitalization efforts being done by government together with the private partners, private sector.
Oh, okay, promising future for e-commerce. Here's a question from Mr. Ando of JETRO. What is your outlook for the motorcycle manufacturing industry? I know, Ando, earlier you mentioned how the local supply chain here is a bit challenged. I'm also very curious, when you look at the motorcycle supply chain in the Philippines. Ando-san?
Sorry, I could not hear you clearly in the last.
Okay. What is your outlook? Okay, let me repeat the question. What is your outlook for the motorcycle manufacturing industry?
Yeah, it is not easy for me to say the outlook in the future, but in the past, the sales of the motorcycle sales and both sales and production in the Philippines has been increasing before COVID, very rapidly increasing after 2017. Then, even though the statistical figure of sales were less than 2 million units per year, but the actual situation must be the sales unit number in the Philippines was more than 2 million per year, because the number of units who sold by a non-association member. Non-association means the statistical figure reflect the number from association member only. Yeah, including the units sold by non-association member. The number of units sold in the Philippines was around or more than 2 million, and the 2 million per year. Such size of market is not rare in Asian market, Asian region, but not so many in the world actually. Then I think once again in long term, the Philippines has good potential as a market of the motorcycle, and by 2017, the production by the association member already more than 1 million per year, I remember. Then this level, this size of production can motivate the manufacturer in the Philippines to localize their input. But once again, we have to take the competition factor in the region into account, because it is point out now the FTA arrangement in the region improves year by year. Therefore, we have to take a regional competition factor into account. Thank you very much.
Mr. Ando, just to follow up, if a motorcycle is built and assembled here in the Philippines, how much of the raw materials or supply chains are also here? Would you say it's 80% at least based in the Philippines, or we're getting so many parts outside?
I don't have subsector-wide proportion of local procurement. Very, very sorry.
Okay, no worries. Thank you very much, Mr. Ando. And I guess it's time to wrap up the Q&A portion. We'd like to direct this final question to the good Secretary, Secretary Lopez. Yes, final question for you, sir. Every time we talk to investors or big manufacturers talking about the industry, they always cite Samsung and Vietnam, the special relationship that the two have. The Korean tech manufacturer actually does most of its smartphone assembly in Vietnam and accounts for a quarter, that's 25% of Vietnam's exports. Samsung is also now building their biggest R&D center for 5G, Internet of Things, big data in the city of Hanoi. That is the biggest R&D center for Southeast Asia. I guess I'm very curious, sir, do we have a Samsung counterpart for the Philippines? Are you trying to court or, convince which big tech companies or which big companies to become our major partner for manufacturing and exports, if at all, sir?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Yes, of course, we're trying to court the big guys into coming and considering Philippines coming into the country to do their manufacturing, or if not, make it at least a base for their R&D. That's the reason why we're pushing for making Philippines also an AI center for excellence, R&D, capabilities, and so that we can really attract all those big companies to do more high value adding services here in the country. You've heard of, I think it was Dyson R&D center that recently decided to set up in the country. So we're inviting more and more of Dyson-like companies to consider Philippines. We're talking of hyperscalers, those that can build more data centers and infrastructures here in the country, as Singapore, Vietnam are reaching saturation point, and that's the reason why we're pushing for Philippines also as the alternative location for those kind of operations, high technology, and we know that CREATE will help in the process. I mean, the CREATE incentive package. But remember, in the CREATE there is this provision that can also allow the president to package to give a better package of incentives to very strategic investments. So that is what we can offer. And maybe just a bit of contribution to the earlier question on the prospects of motorcycle industry, which we consider as right here in the country as well. Mr. Ando is right. Actually, our latest monitoring of the motorcycle industry is growing 22% of production increase as of January 2021 compared to previous year. Recent developments in the industry include Yamaha's expansion in Batangas to produce new models in the country, create 1,000 more jobs. Honda will start exporting its motorcycles to New Zealand this quarter, and another brand expansion, which includes assembly of bigger bikes for the domestic market, as well as export to China and other ASEAN countries. To date, we have about 4 Japanese motorcycle manufacturers and assemblers, I think about 12 from China and 1 European. And I think this is really of course, a fast-growing sector for transportation and mobility.
Exciting times. You guys are going to be very busy. Thank you so much, Secretary Mon Lopez, Mr. Greg Banzon, and Mr. Ando for the expertise and insights you've imparted at this exclusive session. We are truly grateful for the time that you've spent with us this morning. Now, before we say goodbye, we'd also like to ask everyone to please spare a few more minutes of your time to answer our feedback form. Simply scan the QR code, which we will flash on your screens. Do let us know what you think about the webinar, how we can improve, be heard. And that concludes the Security Bank Economic Forum 2021, the future of the Philippine manufacturing industry. On behalf of Security Bank Corporation, we would like to thank all of you for tuning in and being part of our event. It's been a pleasure to connect and engage with all of you. Thank you so much, and stay safe, everybody.